Good afternoon, good evening.
Hey, Earl, how are you?
I'm
Good to
fine,
hear your
sir.
voice as always, man. All right, so we are live in late January. Thanks everyone for making time. I'm going to share our mission moment for this evening, and I hope you all can see my screen. All right, so there were a whole host of things I could have chosen today as a mission moment, but I decided to go with peer mediation because it's fresh, it's new to both our sites, our middle school and our high school, and I think it means big things for kids. I spent a lot of time talking about academic stuff with our SLC this week in terms of learning. I want to expand out learning a bit more to mean something a bit more broadly. So we've talked about peer mediation for the last couple of years, and I've had some hardship in kind of getting things off the ground and started. Of course, COVID kind of makes it hard with remote learning and doing peer mediation remotely. But we kicked things off at both our middle school and our high school. And I'm pleased to say we've got strong teams who have taken part in 2 days of training to be peer mediators, where the purpose of this is to empower our students to prevent, resolve, and transform harmful conflict by developing the values, attitudes, skills, and knowledge toward building peace. And so they're off. They're working with other kids who may have disputes, issues, things that should be worked out. And I think this is powerful in thinking about it's funny. So the middle school presented yesterday, our middle school peer mediation team presented to staff and said, hey, this is who we are. Let us introduce ourselves. This is what we're about. This is why this is important. Kids had brilliant things to say. Some of what they said had to do with, this is a great resume builder and something that I can, put on my college essay, et cetera. And I think that's all true. But I guess as I was looking at them and hearing them speak, I think of like the power of just being able to mediate conflict as an adult, not just in kind of like academic lives, but in personal lives and professional lives, where a lot of what we do as leaders is kind of help people work through things in healthy ways when there are disputes and disagreements. So I think about our kids now who are 13, 12, 11 and up, and think about them experiencing perhaps 7 years of peer mediation training experience, helping of others, and how powerful that is to helping them be really just superstar adults. I look forward to sharing out more here, but I think we're off to something special with having these teams both benefit our school and community right now, as well as benefit our kids' communities later on. So mediation, look out, here we come. For the head of school report tonight, I'm going to open that up, but I think I'm going to have you open it up, and I'll leave this here on the screen just to keep it simple. There are probably 6 points I want to make coming from that report. On second thought, I will share my screen because it's easier for y'all to follow when I do that. Okay, here we are. Almost. All right, so school report in front of you. I hope you had a wonderful time reviewing it and reading it and admiring it before this meeting tonight. I just say this, it's a busy time of year for my team and I. January going into February is typically demanding because we're doing all of the things you do in leading a school at the midpoint in the year, while also then beginning to think about the coming year. And so you're almost running 2 schools at once and doing some planning while also flying the plane. And so I think that's true this year, and it perhaps is even more true this year as we also think about this being a renewal year and all of the good things that happen with that, as well as some of the other initiatives that we're involved in with the possible purchase of our high school, a possible downward expansion, and other initiatives and promising projects. So I'll just say it's a busy time, but we're managing and working our way through it. In looking at the headlines for the past month, I'm not going to go through anything here, but I'm going to kind of zoom out and just say, as you look this over and review what's here, that has come up for the school over the past 30 days and then some. I just think this reflects quite authentically on the mission of the school, in that there's a really balanced focus both on rigorous academics as well as kind of a enriching extracurricular program at the school, and I'm just proud of it overall. This is the sort of balance we want to strike, which can be challenging at times, but I think is best for kids in alignment with our mission of empowering them as scholars and citizens. They may lead fulfilling lives. So I'll move on. Point 3 I want to make from the school leader report is around just openings for the school and staffing. And so right now, moving into the end of January and February, we are surveying our staff to learn a bit more about their intentions for the coming year. We'll report out something more fully about where we are with that after we collect that data by this Friday. So next meeting, you'll see more of that and hear more about that. I'm going to talk about graduation forecasts when we get into committee report outs a little later on. With regard to miscellaneous updates, a couple of things here. I think just with the self-assessment survey, we're going to hold off from debriefing on that tonight. We've got a response rate of about 55% coming from trustee members. So I want to make sure everyone has a chance to chime in and provide their self-assessment of how things are going thus far this year from a board perspective. And then we'll look to kind of share out and debrief on that next month. Beyond that, there are a number of events coming up at the school. You'll see them here in front of you. If you're interested in attending any of these, taking part in any of these, just let me know and we'll make it happen in terms of coordination. So they're there for you to compare with your busy calendars. We're going to talk about, yeah, Lenny, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Can we scroll back up just a tad bit? What's going on with the Black History Spirit Week and the event that Wednesday? What give me a little more insight about what that is, please.
Yeah. So, I mean, Melissa, you want to say a bit more about Spirit Week and what's going on at the high school? And then I can say a bit more about that Wednesday at the middle school.
Yeah, we don't have the days planned yet. I think that's done alongside our student government association. So they're going to assign out like some specific things, but those will be days where there are like dress opportunities to share like rep your country and show pride in different ways, and that will be announced to kids. So there's like just something that everyone can participate in every day, and we share that out via Jupiter, our platform. And then there's the I can't speak to the middle school, but we're doing a couple other things at the high school. We're doing a performance with a group that we've worked with before. I'm blanking on the actual name, but they're do sort of a play. We've adjusted our schedule slightly so that they can have a little bit more time, and we're doing that in kind of 2 rounds in order to make sure that every child can see it. So we'll do that on Wednesdays during our community meeting time. We're also doing some door decoration and what we're calling Black Wall Street, where some of our students who are entrepreneurs can actually like showcase some of the things they do. We have students who cook. We have students who have like 3D print pins, some who do t-shirts or different ways that they are working on their talents. So they get to showcase those to the community as well.
It'll be helpful. I the reason I ask is I don't know that I've ever seen an event during the month of February that was categorized under a Spirit Week. So that really caught my attention. So I applaud you for the creativity, and I anticipate learning more. So thank you.
Yeah, we will probably advertise it in our we will definitely advertise it in our family facing newsletter, so maybe Josh can forward that along once our kiddos kind of take the reins and decide exactly how they want Spirit exhibited and on what day of the week.
Yeah, I think it's important to say that our student government at the high school is sort of leading the way with a lot of this effort this year, obviously under the guidance of our grade level leaders and 12th grade advisor. So I do think it's exciting. I share your interest in the Spirit Week aspect of this too.
And for them to be in an environment that fosters that is equally important. So job well done.
Yeah.
And you can participate from afar
Mhm.
or come by.
Mhm.
Yeah, as I learn more, I think I have the option. That's perfect. Thank you.
Cool. I've got some things to share with regard to public relations and strategy, but I'll do that very likely during the executive session tonight. We'll also share out some updates on our purchase of 584 Driggs or efforts toward it during the executive session. And then I'll just say that the school raised about $700 for the campaign against hunger this year. This is, I think, the third or fourth year we've done this. And so just, I think, a good kind of like effort to support a fellow nonprofit in Bed-Stuy. So those are the updates that I wanted to share out during this portion of the meeting tonight. Next up within the agenda is the data dashboard. So I'm going to share that too, so you all can see that. And there are 4 or 5 updates I want to make there, so this team is fully kind of updated on where we are as a school this month and what progress we've made, what we faced, challenges, etc. As of now. All right, I'm going to make this a bit bigger. Okay, so I think as I typically do, we'll start with enrollment, which is not all that different from the past month. We did lose 4 students on net, which you'll see here. Nothing systematic or a trend here. It just happened with a couple of students for individual reasons across the school sites. I believe that we're enrolling 3 students at our high school at the start of the second semester as of next week. So we're at around 540, which is where we've been over the course of the year, which is certainly up from our budgeted enrollment and just slightly below our target. Just slightly below our target enrollment. Beyond enrollment, other things to sort of highlight here are with regard to attendance, which also has not changed all that much over the past month. It's been steady at about 85%. And so that's true of both sites, both the middle school and the high school. If you're interested in how we track attendance, you get to see a whole lot here in looking at attendance changes by week, the cumulative attendance from a running fashion. And then we also look at like tiers of attendance. Kids who are chronically absent have very low attendance, kids who are somewhere in the middle, and then kids with high attendance. And then we tend to address circumstances across each of those tiers, which varies in intensiveness. And so I think this has been a consistent sort of effort for us as a school. We're slightly below where we are, as I've said in prior months, in comparison to typical or prior years, and that's really a result of additional sickness and kids being out because they're sick more often. And I think that's true of students and staff. So that's where we are with attendance. Happy to answer any questions folks have or field any ideas you have with regard to interventions there. But I do feel as if we've got a strong, healthy team to do that work across our academic counselors, our deans at the middle school, and our social work team. I also want to spend a little bit of time talking about last table, just development. So just a quick update for this team from a fundraising perspective in ending the year. We ended up in the month of December raising just under $30,000. That came from 15 donors in total. And I think, I had a good discussion with the Development and Finance Committee last week about this. And I think, right now we're in a pretty good place financially as a school. We've got some things coming up initiative-wise that may require some doubling down with regard to development. But in closing out the year, this felt healthy and fine. And so we'll sort of see where things go this spring and whether we need to prioritize this more so than we are, but feels healthy at this point. And that's all that I have for updates to the dashboard. If folks have questions about other tables I didn't mention verbally tonight, I'm happy to discuss those too. And I think with that, strategic planning, I do want to talk more about our quest to expand downward in some of the efforts we're making, but I think that's probably best to do during the executive session. So I'll hold off on that. And I think we can move into committee reports. And so, Jim, if you want to move down the list there, I'll pass the baton.
All right, AFC.
And so, Alex, why don't you go ahead? I was not at this meeting last week, but I believe Alex and Jeanette and Chris did meet on Friday.
Yes, we did. This is, a brief update. Now, this is going to be through November. So we have invoiced for an enrollment that is different than what Josh just mentioned. So it'll take a couple months before we catch up to the enrollment. So this is based on an invoiced enrollment of 550. So you'll see that, percent actual to budget is at 106% since we were very conservative budgeting 519 students this year. All of our financial metrics continue to be well within where they should be, including days cash on hand. So we know, based on the change in enrollment, which we are tracking every single month, we have a variance of, over $900,000 in enrollment. We will see that close a little bit as we kind of adjust to the lower enrollment, but we do know that we will probably have a significant variance at the end of the year. We have increased some of our expenses that we have talked about previously. We had an increase in transportation and some other expenses related. So we're looking at, a difference of about $800,000 when we're looking at the increase in expenses and the increase in revenue. And again, we will adjust that as we move forward and any other expenses that we know we may incur between now and the end of the year. Our capital expenses, there's a slight variance there. When we were working on the budget, we did have to purchase some additional computers for staff and for students that we didn't account for in the budget. So that's what represents that variance right there. Any questions on this portion of the financial report? Okay. I'm going to skip past the balance sheet, mostly because there's nothing to call to attention at that point. As for net income, our year-to-date net income is $363,000 compared to a budget of about $171,000. That budget is also based on, some of these expenses are annualized throughout the year. And then some of the funding that we will pick up further into the year that we may not see reflected here. We do project that compensation will be at or more likely under budget. As Josh indicated, we have some open positions. But I think that when we did this budget, we budgeted for a very full staff. And because of all of our grant income was included in our budget this year, we don't need to do the reconciliation to net income to pull out the additional grant monies that we had done last year. Any questions on the notes to the P&L? Okay. And then finally, it's just our cash flow projection, which again looks healthy. No major unplanned expenses that we have to capture at this point. Escrow is fully funded, so nothing there. There's only one other brief update as it impacts finance, and that is with our 403B, we are now considered a large plan filer. So we will need to engage an auditor in order to audit our plan for 2022. I have spoken to Michelle at MMB. They are a good size operation, but she indicated there may be some issues with getting us scheduled. So I have reached out to a previous contact that I have at UHY, and they are able to complete that work. So, what I'm hoping is to engage UHY to do the 403B plan audit. The cost was the same. UHY matched MMB's, so the cost on that is $13,000.
One question on the, you showed projected net income of $1 million, I believe, or so, plus or minus, and we're 300,000 of that we've sort of captured to date. Is that to say that the 4 million number I saw cash on hand will end up landing somewhere around 4.7 at the end of the year?
Yes, I think that's, some of the excess cash may be expended. And, this is also going to be somewhat dependent on what we are going to encounter with the purchase of 584 Driggs. If Unity has to
that's
front,
what I'm asking.
So if Unity has to front any cash, I will be participating in those meetings as we move forward, so that I can also, hear from the underwriters and get all the information. I have some projections that will need to be included in their next report, but I will try to get a better handle on any estimated outflows of Unity's cash, through FOMB, so we can make a better adjustment and then, get a better sense.
Well,
of what
okay.
the-
So on that point, when you have those meetings, I think you need to very clearly delineate any expenses that are related to the bond issue, because those can be refunded to us via the bond issue, right? We have that placeholder in there for cost of the issuance. So I'd like to see no net cash leaving the school related to the bond. When we issue the bond proceeds cover anything we're spending on the bond. So if you kind of track all that, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Just taking
Cool.
notes. Excellent. Any other questions? That's all I have on finance.
Great. Thank you, Alex.
Okay, DFC.
Jim, my sense is that we talked about development already, and we'll talk about facilities a bit later on. That was the gist
Yeah,
of what we
let's move
discussed
on.
last week. So we'll come back to it.
Yeah, we'll go into executive and talk about that stuff. ECPC.
And my
There,
conversation
so-
with Earl and with Sal and with Trudy last week was really around strategy with the downward expansion. And so we'll talk about that a bit more later on in this call too. So we can skip.
Okay. Okay, SLC.
I think what we'll do here is Melissa and I are going to share out some rather outdated numbers, but I think numbers that are worth looking at to get kind of a bigger story of what we are sort of working through as we approach the end of this year too, and testing this year. And then we'll also talk about graduation forecasts. So let me share my screen there. I'm going to go to the SLC slides from last Wednesday's call. So we did deep dive into this with Jeanette last week, and I think it's worthy of kind of bringing to the full board just to get a sense from everyone here on like, hey, are we thinking about this in the right way? Are there some ways in which we might kind of think about things differently? And so we did report out Unity proficiency data from last year's spring exams, middle school, high school this fall. So we've done that. At the time, we didn't have state data to compare with or district data to compare with. We did receive that back in December, and so we're sharing that out now. As we share that out, we also received some guidance from leaders in the state, both the state education department and the New York City Charter Center. And so I've highlighted coming from James Merriman, the executive director there. And that's just that due to the lack of assessments in 2020, low number of test takers in 2021, and differences in assessment format, we caution that the results from 2022 assessments are not directly comparable to any other year. They better serve as a baseline for future years. Furthermore, we note that definitive comparisons between districts and charters as to sector efficacy are difficult to make given the differences in mission, enrollment structure, and demographics. Any comparisons in red are meant to provide context and start conversations, not end them. So I think this is kind of a conversation starter today with some analyses perhaps to be conducted a bit later on. So we're going to share our kind of initial thoughts on some portion of our analysis that we've conducted over the past month with comparative state testing data as an FYI, including some outstanding questions that we have. In the end, I think right now the actions that we're taking as a school academically to promote growth, grade level proficiency, and high school and college readiness remain the same after analyzing these data. So we're taking the appropriate courses of action as a school this year. This data does nothing to change our course. It just gives us more confidence in what we're doing being the right steps. So what you're seeing here is a table that looks at a few different settings and then compares proficiency results in ELA and math. This is only middle school data and elementary school with some of the comparisons from 2019 to 2022, and then offers some of the percent point changes across 2019 to 2022. So we're essentially doing what has been advised for us not to do, compare across years, but it's interesting to do. And so let's see where it takes us. So we've got New York City charters. We saw some of this data preliminarily this spring. This is charters grades 3 through 8, so not 6 through 8, a little different. And you'll see that charters and ELA across those years of testing lost 2 percentage points in ELA and just under 17 points in math. So big drop in math, small drop in ELA across charters in New York City. Across DOE schools, 3 through 8, there was a slight uptick percentage point wise in ELA and a downtick or a rather significant drop in math of almost 8%. For Unity, grades 6 through 8 only, and you've seen this data, we were up 1% from 36 to 37% in ELA from 2019 to 2022. And then in math, we were down 10 points. So on par with what the DOE and charters experienced also. What's interesting for us with regard to middle schools in looking at our 2 districts of comparison that we've looked at in the past, 13 where we're located, they experienced a gain in ELA of 11 percentage points and a gain in math of 9 percentage points. Moreover, 16, which we typically outperform soundly, experienced a gain of 10 percentage points over those 3 years and 6 percentage points. And so what ultimately transpired is we were kind of on par with some of the results in 16, which we haven't seen in the past. So that was surprising to us back in December, and we wanted to deep dive and figure out perhaps why. Why would this be? What's going on here? And there are a couple of hypotheses here that I think are worth naming. And they are, are there changes in enrollment perhaps driving this? Are there participation rate changes driving this? Are there demographic changes driving this? Are there real learning experiences perhaps driving this? And so we began to kind of look in a couple of these possibilities and factors at play to see if we could learn a bit more. Are there any questions so far before diving into the second part of our analysis? So we then look at 2 things. We decided to look at enrollment and participation with both Unity versus our districts of comparison. In blue here, in sort of the middle shade of blue, we looked at the changes in enrollment from 2019 to 2022. And this is a percentage point change. And so you'll see at Unity, we had a slight decrease of 3% for the number of students participating in the exam. I'm sorry, no, that were enrolled in the school, sorry. In CST 13, there was a 14 percentage point drop in enrollment across schools of that district from 2019 to 2022. And in CST 16, there was a change of 12 percentage points. So some significant changes with regard to enrollment, decreases in enrollment across these 2 districts of comparison in comparison to Unity. We also looked at participation, specifically the percentage of students not testing, opting out of the exam. And so at Unity, we in ELA had 4% of students not testing in 2019 versus 11% in 2022, and in math, 5% versus 9% this past year. In looking at our districts of comparison, there are larger percentages of students that did not test. In 13, 27% of students did not test in ELA in 2022, and in 16, 16% of students did not test in 2022. For math, the percentages were even greater. 40% of students in 13 did not test, and 22% of kids did not test in 16. So I think just in looking at this, I'm trying to figure out what the heck is going on here, because this seems strange that we've got these outlier districts of comparison that seem to be doing things that the overall DOE did not experience from 2019 and 22. I think the finding here is just that we simply can't rule out that enrollment and participation were in play as driving some of these results. But that's really all we can say right now. And so I think we then move into what's next.
Josh, I don't understand the enrollment one, because unless you make an assumption about people testing better staying, and the others dropping out, the enrollment shouldn't matter. I get the participation thing. I would assume that the kids who are not good at taking tests are going to opt out. So you're going to lose your tail there. And increase the overall score. Why does enrollment matter without knowing who unenrolled, who went away?
Melissa, you want to field this?
I mean, I think it's all conjecture at this point. Though I don't think that it is true that students who don't test well tend to opt out. What we're seeing in the opt-out movement is more affluent communities choosing not to test their children. And then we also see a little bit more move towards independent schooling, the suburbs, and homeschooling, which tend to also be communities that are affluent. Those are just kind of local trends, not hyper local trends, but Northeast trends. So I don't think assigning a true cause here is simple. But I do know that the opt-out movement, we see more of that in
well, then that's even worse news for us if the right end of the curve is opting out at these other schools and they're still outperforming us.
Yeah.
And the change in enrollment is due to folks who probably tested at the right end of the curve, going to homeschooling and private schools and all of that. That means you cut off for our comp set, the right end of the curve. So we are not, or that would mean our comparison is with the folks at these schools who are not from the backgrounds, Melissa, that you're talking about, and that makes it look even worse for us, right?
Yeah, that logic is correct, and so I think I looked into this somewhat roughly before then moving too deeply into it and wanting to kind of focus on things that kind of matter now. With regard to these past 3 years, there's been a steady sort of like number of students of affluent communities who are like, I don't need this. I don't need to test. And there's not a lot of pressure to do so, so I'm not going to. There is also the impact that COVID and increased absenteeism had on students taking exams. And so those students who are most susceptible to hardship were also students who perhaps didn't come to school on those days when there was testing. And from there, that may also sort of like be a driving force. To your first question, Jim, with enrollment, if families of low incomes and SES backgrounds are being forced out of these districts because of gentrification and it being too expensive to live in New York City, that's going to be influencing the left tail of the curve. And so that might be a driving factor here as well. I think, as Melissa said, they're conjecture, so we don't know for sure. And it's like, okay, so we've done some research here. There's some big questions. What the heck do we do about this? Because, is this something that's going to be lingering, or is this a one-time thing? And I think that's where we get into maybe some of the questions that come up in conducting some of this. So I think I just reiterate, coming from the Charter Center, that like these comparisons right now, they're not clear cut and meant to kind of like start some conversation and not end them. And so for us, I do think that the work that we're doing now to drive growth and grade and level proficiency are still the right moves. And in fact, perhaps doubling down on these is what's necessary. And so those things right now being like really targeted, smart interventions based on data and what we know of kids and their skills at any point in time and being responsive to them.
Josh, can you go up to the previous slide?
Yeah.
I think the other thing that we can show is that we are investing families at a higher rate than some of our partner districts in participating in these measures so that we can do some strong planning, so that we can be counted. We can't truly know who the 40% of students in CSD 13 are who didn't take this test, but we do know that we have a slightly stronger showing.
Do you have any sense, and I'm not talking about 13 or 16 or whoever, but just kind of broadly, are you hearing about schools who maybe are advising their low performers to opt out to beef the scores up, or is that not happening?
I know of schools who are advising all families, mostly
Not
elementary
to take.
schools, not to test, but
Oh, wow.
I don't necessarily. I've heard of schools in the past who've maybe suggested that students with disabilities not test because it would be challenging for them to say sit for that long, etc. These are not things we do at our school. But I know of some specific schools who've been reprimanded, I guess is the right word, for encouraging families not to engage. District schools.
Interesting. Okay. All right. Thanks.
So, as I was saying, I we're doing the things that seem to matter most in promoting growth and proficiency, from interventions in a targeted way to skill development among academic leaders and teachers, and then keeping our strongest people on team. And then I think, long term, like the expansion downward would perhaps address some of the deficiencies kids coming as of elementary school coming into middle school. So these are things we have in our mind, and I think continue to have our mind even after looking at this data. There are a couple of questions that do come up. And so I think I'd like to just know from this team whether these are the right questions and whether you agree with them. But for me, in looking at this data, one question I have is just how is NYSED interpreting these results given the participation constraints? If you got 40% of a district not testing, you can't have reliable data. And so what's that mean if the main measure that you're holding schools to is proficiency scores at the school level? It's hard. So I don't know what that means. I know that we haven't heard anything from the state about our scores this year. There hasn't been a big emphasis on that. And I think what we've heard is that it was still kind of a wonky year. So, move on. Secondly, a question that I have is, will the lower participation in our districts of comparison continue in future years? And then what does that mean for how we approach testing and what's expected of us? So those are the two big questions I have that I want to get some guidance on from those who kind of are in the arena and able to maybe provide some guidance for that. But are there other questions that you put on the table here, or are these the right ones?
No, those are the right ones. I mean, I think, look, I know it is quite conceivable that, wealthy families, whatever you want to call it, are telling their kids not to take the test. I don't know how many of those we have at Unity. So and in our comparison, schools, I suspect that the 40% is made up mostly of folks who don't test, historically not tested that well, or do not like taking tests, or are uncomfortable, they just don't perform well in that environment, which means you're cutting off the tail. And if you randomly selected 40% of the kids and said, you folks don't have to take the test, okay, I get it. Now you've got a good data set still, because it's all random. But when you allow people to make the decision on their own, I elected, not to do hockey, right? Because I'm horrible at it. But I elected it. I think I think that's probably what we're looking at here, is kids who are not comfortable in a testing environment, who do not historically test well, saying, I'm going to take a pass. So I think you're probably, I don't know, we'll see what the data says next year. I think they're probably cutting off the lower end of the tail, is what's happening. But who knows?
One of the other thoughts for analysis, not that I want to, again, distract us from the current work, but I think maybe the better comparison would be for us to look at a subset of students, which is 75% of our students, those students who classify as economically disadvantaged, and then look at how those students did versus the district of comparison, and then also to look at the participation rate of just that subgroup across our school and districts of comparison. So for us, it's a very small percentage of students who I don't
know that it's meaningful. It's not meaningful because you only have 4% that didn't take it. So I think I think understanding who is not taking it and how that affects our comp set is key. And I'm sure it'll come out at some point. You know, someone's going to, like you say, NYSED cannot look at this and say, this is good data. It's just not. You can't, it's not a randomized sample that you're looking at. You're looking at people self-selecting to take a test. And theoretically, those people know how to take tests.
Yeah.
So it's a challenge. It's going to be a challenge for the state to figure this out.
Yeah. So I think what that means is we move into maybe a measure that perhaps is easier to kind of gauge from the state level, and that's graduation. And so we recently looked at where we are now with graduation forecasts. And you saw that in the school movie report, but I'm going to go to slide 29, which offers the same general analysis. And so, as we've done in past years, we tend to look at the number or percentage of students who are on track. They have the credits they need to graduate in June versus those who are close to and are on watch. They have ample credits and are able to graduate, but we should keep an eye on where they are. They've got to have a fairly solid academic year in the 12th grade year to graduate on time. Those students who are off track, who can graduate, but may need some more intensive supports credit-wise and may have to fully deliver this year, as well as partake in some more nuanced or individual schedules to help them earn the credits they need to graduate. And then those who are unable to graduate in 4 years. So this year we've got a relatively small cohort of students, 56 12th grade students, and you'll see the way the percentages break down with 73% of our students on track, about 11% on watch, 9% off track, and then 7% who are unable to graduate in 4 years. This is a little fuzzy, but I think these categories do work. These categories also were made as of 9/1, as of students moving into their senior year. We're just closing out the first semester now, so we'll have grades next month on how kids did during their first semester, which is typically a pretty good indicator of how they'll do in the second semester. And so in general, the percentages here across different categories are similar to what we've seen in past years. The difference is that we've got a smaller cohort, so each kid represents a larger portion of our graduation pie. So we do have a strong team looking at this data and providing interventions and supports to kids intensively in some cases. That team meets weekly. That's myself and Melissa, Grace, our other co-principal culture and ops, our director of academic counseling, and our 12th grade academic counselor. And we look down the board with only 56 kids. You can get a pretty good sense of what kids need, what progress they're making over the course of even a week. So we look at that and we provide support. We address some of the challenges, think about ways in which we collaborate with families to make this happen. That's the work. And so that is the work that we're doing now and we'll continue to do through June. Are there questions about this data? I think our goal, as we have each year, is 93% of our students graduating in 4 years. And that includes all students and students with disabilities. We've delivered on that in the past. And in doing so, have soundly outperformed the state average overall and have significantly outperformed the state average with regard to students with disabilities, where about a quarter of our kids are classified as having special needs. Melissa, would you add anything there?
I would happily answer any questions about strategy, et cetera. I think the projections are pretty clear, though.
Yeah. Okay, so I think with that,
Oh, I guess one thing I can add here, generally graduation is a complicated matrix of credits accrued and by category and regions. We had our last student who, don't say anything because it's going to be a surprise. We're throwing her a party on Friday. Our last student who was regions deficient get a very solid Algebra 1 score after some smart strategy from Louise Eason and her team. So we're tracking at this point credits and making sure that students have all of the opportunities there to gain credit.
Yeah, that's helpful. So we also had interim assessment data for the first round of assessments on the docket with the SLC. We tested with the second round of IAs this past week. And so I think the move is to just present everything out next month. And so we'll hold off from that tonight. One thing I didn't do, Melissa, I didn't give you the stage to talk a bit about how things went with comparisons for Regents exams at the high school as of the spring in comparison to state. If the team wants to sort of have us present there, we can. You got to see middle school data. We didn't talk about high school data.
Jump in there, please.
Yeah. So. Okay, Melissa, I'll hand the baton to you.
Yeah. So I want to start by saying that headline, our goal is always to meet or outperform the state. We did not meet that goal almost anywhere. We had one area. So I want to put that out there before we go into any context. There is a lot of context, as we've discussed before. Like, these are conversation starters more than they are definitive trends across years. So one thing that is not clear here is what I'm reporting on is a passing score, which across all Regents examinations is a 65, is considered a pass. However, for last school year and this school year through this coming August, the necessary bar for graduation is a 15 scaled points below a passing score. So we're still using that passing barometer to compare year over year and compare to districts. However, Regents are a really important indicator of graduation. They are exit examinations. And this doesn't reflect the scores necessary to exit and move on to a college environment. So that is one piece of context. Of course, we also, and that decision from the state about the lowered bar has to do with the incredibly varied experiences of students across the state and across schools. So we're looking at a school year last year where we did have interruptions. We had long quarantines when students were ill or exposed. We had a time when our entire community quarantined, and we did school remote when we had to do that. But we know that there are inconsistencies in student learning throughout the year. And then what you're seeing here are sort of the overall comparative results for subgroups without the subgroups of interest, just as we're gaining some of that data that we would be using for comparison now. So some of the things we're proud of are not present there. Headlines. Overall in 2022, our passing rates are lower than in 2019. That's true for us, and that's true for New York State. There are a couple of places that are notable in that the differential, even though our absolute scores are lower, decreased quite a bit. So you take a course like geometry, where across years we've been scoring far lower than we'd like, and last year we scored even lower than we did in 2019. However, the differential was quite a bit over 30 points less. So it's, again, hard to say what we're gaining versus on the other due to comparisons or not in this context, but we are excited to see across many of our STEMs courses that differential close a bit, and we're hopeful we can build upon that as we, like, kids have had more normal foundational years. Our strongest showing last year, though absolutely it was a little bit lower, was our Algebra 1 class, in comparison to the state where we had a differential of 5 rather than 2 above. So we know that's a strong foundation students are going to build geometry and Algebra 2 understanding on. There's other context here. Our ELA class was our absolutely highest score, though it was we performed lower than we had in the past, and we performed lower than we did with the state. And a notable thing about that course is that we offer that course in 10th grade, though it is a course or an exam designed to be given in 11th grade. We believe that giving students multiple opportunities if they're not successful the first time puts them in better shape for their senior year, rather than going into senior year with a Regents deficiency. And for those students who are successful, they can then focus on AP exams in their 11th and 12th grade year. We haven't, as I said, looked very closely at the differential, and we don't have up here the differential in scores for students with disabilities as compared to the state. However, we do know that we have closed the gap between students and with general education experiences and students with disabilities across years.
And even in a couple of cases this year, we had our students with disabilities who experienced co-taught classes outperforming on average our general population. We haven't seen that before, and so I think that's a good thing and bodes well for the sort of intensive supports we provided to our kids this past year in particular. And I'm confident that those scores would be well beyond the state, given what we typically see from state performance-wise for students with disabilities, which then ultimately kind of triggers up to a lower graduation among students with disabilities. So I think we can move the next slide and offer a few additional sort of insights.
So in response, looking at this, our focus continues to be promoting skill growth, grade level proficiency, and college readiness. So we've paid particular attention this year in making sure that the scopes and sequences that our courses follow and the level of learning that students are engaging in is at grade level work. We've put in some interventions as well to make sure that those are happening alongside that high bar of learning, which includes flexible intervention blocks weekly at the high school. So we have a tutoring block, and by quarter or by unit, teachers require students to attend those and communicate with families to get kids there to get extra help, in addition to a more traditional opt-in office hour setting that we offer several times a month as well. We've done some curricular work to identify external curricula and update our existing curriculum to match the rigor of external assessments. A strong example of this is getting a Regents aligned math curriculum that teachers then differentiate for their students and add discourse activities to, but we know that the practice that students are doing is aligned strongly to the end line assessments and the standards that students are assessed on. We're hoping that this is like the real big shift for our geometry course this year, and then just strengthening our assessment cycles to better plan for exams. All exams are written this summer. We've done some more co-grading to make sure that our results are very predictive, etc. So those are some of the things we're doing. And then a couple other key takeaways here. Our AP exam results from last spring reflect annual gains and positive movement in learning. We looked at those a bit in the fall, so we've seen those, and we have increased in participation year over year this year, with 74% of eligible students taking exams. We doubled our earned AP credit for last year over the year before, and we've decreased the number of students scoring A1, which is A2 is likely ready for college level courses. A1 is, we're not sure. So we're proud of that. And then we just have a lot more stability and solid staffing. Last year, especially looking at our STEMS courses, we had all of our science teachers filling in for a vacancy. Our department chair was out on leave for most of the year. So we see a lot more stability there. We have only one vacancy that's being filled in directly as a department chair, and that is not an attested course. So we are in a stronger place from that perspective. Last year with our APs, for example, we've seen our highest increases in classes where people teach them year over year. So we're excited to see some stability in our Regents classes as well. And then Josh has been considering actions to increase competitive for select hard to staff positions. I know Michelle has been doing some research there as well.
So I guess Jim and Lenny and Earl, I think key findings wise, or you're taking, there's a lot here, and there's a lot to kind of sift through in 5-10 minutes in terms of data. But I think that the key headlines here are that we didn't do as well on the Regents exam this year versus the prior versus 2 years ago, but we did better relatively than the state average overall. So there was less of a drop. So, okay, that's where things are. And then we do have another data point because we've kind of grown up a little bit and we just have more exams that kids are taking that offer some sense of where we're moving. And so in looking at advanced placement exams, in comparison to Regents exams, we did see some relative gains longitudinally AP wise. And so that is promising. Again, as Melissa opened up, our goal, and this is coming down to us from the state, is to outperform the state averages in Regents exams, which is ultimately what we want to do. So we've got work to do there. And there are some signs here that I think are relatively positive, either in comparison to state or in looking at other sorts of assessments. Is that fair, Jim? Is that sort of what you see here? Or
yeah, I mean, the AP data is interesting. Is it earned AP credits at 7% of the student body moved to 14, or is it 7% of the line above it, the 51%, and then 14% of that same cohort? You know what I mean? Because you're the folks taking it went up 50%, so I would expect 7 to move to something like 11 anyway, just doing nothing. Is it? How is that measured? The earned AP credit.
It's just that, so if we had 100 kids test in 2021, 7% earned a 3 or above. In 2022, 14% of students earned a 3 or above.
Okay, so it's apples to apples. Yeah, that's that's good data.
So
yeah, can you pop back up to slide 17 real quick?
And then I think what Melissa and I are pleased with, I think the most, is that one is exposure to a college level course, but it maybe indicates, and Melissa, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think you're stronger.
I don't have a problem with that. I'd rather know. I think the AP tests are good at helping you know for sure, where is this child and what do we need to do? So I don't mind. I like that the number of ones went down, but I don't really have a problem with a high number of ones, because it's a very, I took a lot of these APs. I think it's a very good way to assess where somebody is. But it is great that it went down to 52.
I'm just curious, when I see the percentages and the change in numbers, is the number of students enrolled an attribute that reflects the result in these numbers?
Let me make sure I understand you, Lenny. Can you say that?
Yeah, so what I'm saying is, if you scroll back up, I think it was page 17. If you scroll back up to 17 for a minute. Okay, perfect. And if I look at the unity column, and I'm focusing between 19 and 21, it looks like there is a change in the number of students. Am I correct?
No, those are percentage of students passing the exams.
Okay, so there's significant.
68% in 2016, 68% of our Algebra 1 students in 2019 scored above a 65 in that exam. In 2022, 62% scored a
Okay.
60 above.
I thought that was the number, and then compared to the state. So these are the averages. Okay, got it.
Yep.
So now I ask the question differently. Did we have the same number of students enrolled in 19, or do we have more or less in 22?
Approximately the same, but because they're percentages, it's not going to make
Okay, got
control.
it. Okay,
Yeah, and
That's fair
another notable thing is that our class sizes are different. So our number of seniors this year versus number of seniors other years, because
Right.
of the size of our building, we enroll different cohort sizes. So it'll always be a little bit different, but the expectation stays pretty similar year over year.
yeah, I know it's hard to have the same level of exact enrollment with different grades and years. I was just curious as to whether or not that played a factor, but you've answered my question. Thank you.
On the AP front, I think one of the most striking things is there's a report or a score report that's called Equity and Excellence that comes out from the College Board. And what they do is they look at a graduating class summary. So they're actually looking at how many students are enrolled in the school and how many of students exit with some sort of AP credit, a 3 or higher. And our graduating class summary was 31% last year. So about 1 in 3 students will walk out of Unity with college credit. When at many schools, 1 in 3 students are not invited to take an AP course. So that I think is not included here. So that 7 to 14 is really meaningful because it means more students are leaving at a college ready level. And even if you just look up scores, if you're a parent and you're looking up scores, and what does a score mean on the AP site, they very loudly publicize that that scoring 1s and 2s is still encouraging. It is a better predictor of college success than not sitting in that level, of course.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. Can you just pop back to 17? Sorry, I just want to make sure I'm reading right. I'm trying to figure out something else, which Josh hit on, the decline. Take Algebra 1, top row. New York State 2019 was 66, it fell to 57.
Mhm.
And we were in 68, we fell to 62.
Mhm.
New York State then, next row, 70 fell to 36, almost got whacked in half. And we went from 13 to 10. This is if I'm reading it right, this is the most depressing thing I've seen in a long time. This was like, holy cow! Look at these declines across the board. It's unbelievable.
And it's
64 to 39. It's unbelievable.
It's truly challenging to know as well how much of this is learning loss and how much of this is motivation. Again, remember that none of
It's both.
These are
both.
pass
Look at
rates.
the absences. Yeah.
And the pass rates are, and some absences are very contextualized as well, but the pass rates are no longer necessary for this data point we're looking at here. So what level of motivation did students have? And how did that mix with what they had learned? Where in years past, when graduation is on the line, reporting that this information being used by colleges to determine admission, or at minimum being used to select you into a remedial course, with all of those things off the table, it seems a little less pressing. So it's very challenging to know exactly what the root is or which percentage of the pie. Those are probably all true. There is learning loss, and there is a dip in motivation, and there is absence, and there is real illness, and those are all true. But that's why this is a little makes my head spin as a school leader to look at.
Oh, it's brutal, and I'm sure you're probably seeing this all across the country. It's this is really brutal for this cohort of kids. Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, some less than clear data across the board, middle school, high school, I think is what we're looking at from this past year. And as school leaders, there are questions about how to proceed. In with the lens of kind of these comparisons in play. So we kind of know what's best for our kids, and we know we want them to be academically and what skills we want them to have upon graduation. And so we can focus on that. But what's it mean in relative form? Trickier when looking at this data. So I think that, yeah, that was, we spent a good amount of time with Jeanette digging into this last week. And actually Josh was a part of that call too and was helpful. I think, one of the questions he raised, which I think is a good one, is, so you've got circumstances that are pretty dire, and we experienced a once in a lifetime, we hope, challenge. And so with that, it makes sense to sort of answer that challenge or respond to that challenge with some big, bold moves as well. And so we had a healthier conversation around that, where Melissa had some smart things to say based on conversations we've had about where we might go. And some of this depends on what happens over the coming couple of months with regard to expansion, et cetera. But I think intensive supports is one very clear pathway for us in thinking about kids who are behind grade level and need supports. And so I was thinking about that tonight prior to this meeting, and I think, you all have family and kids in your families. And when there's a hardship of some kind, or your kids are struggling, or you've got nephews, whatever it is, who are facing struggle academically, the answer typically is, let's figure out how to get them additional help and a tutor, whatever it is. And I think we're now thinking not about one child or two students, but about a collection of students within a school and a significant mass of students. And so the same sorts of solutions come in play. If you've got a critical mass of students who are struggling academically because of a big once in a lifetime challenge, we've got to answer it with maybe some of the same interventions. And those can be demanding and require resources. And so I think during the SLC call, we had just a good discussion about where we might go with this in the coming year or two. And if we want to get bold, what are our answers? So I think to be continued there, but that was the gist of the committee call last week. So I think with that, Jim, we can move into approval items. Without quorum tonight, I think we can probably move into public comment.
Yeah.
And without public, we can move into board meeting assessment and thinking about next month. And the next meeting will be in early March. We've got a short stint here with a break in the third week of February. So in terms of days of school, I thought it'd be best just to have something in early March when we've got some good data. And in March, we expect to report out on our second round of interim assessments. Middle school, those are mock exams. Another batch of graduation forecasts with semester one data factored in. There's been some good work done data-wise with our alumni success counselor and director of college and career readiness. So I want to share out kind of where we are there over the past 3 years with 3 cohorts now having graduated from our school. And then I imagine having some updates on kind of the purchase or quest to purchase our high school building, as well as maybe some updates on our quest to expand downward. In addition to that, we'll have some data on staff retention forecasts. And then, as I said earlier, perhaps a debrief during the executive session on the board self-assessment. So a busy March meeting.
Okay, great. You want to move, stop the recording, move to executive?